Welcome to the Times of Israel's Daily Briefing. Today is Wednesday, February 26th, day 509 of the war. Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our diplomatic reporter, Lazar Berman, political reporter, Tal Schneider, and reporter Sue Surkes for a very packed program. Hello to you all.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Hi, Amanda.
Good to see you all. Today, this morning, Israel took to the streets to honor the funeral procession of Shiri, Ariel, and Kfir Bibas, who were all slain by Hamas in November 2023. We will hear from Sue at the end of the program about how Ariel's 5-year-old friend is dealing with his loss and discuss the processions in the second half, as well as the funeral yesterday of Oded Lifshitz. But first, we're going to hear an update from Lazar on the deal reportedly reached between Hamas and Israel for the release of the Palestinian security prisoners, and the return of 4 hostages remains today. This concludes phase 1 of the negotiated ceasefire. We'll also learn from Tal about Opposition Leader Yair Lapid's new peace plan for the day after in Gaza, and about movement in the political sphere with some threats from the head of the United Torah Judaism Party, again pushing for elections if the blanket exemptions from the army are not reached for all young Haredi men. So last night, Hamas and Israel reportedly reached an agreement for the release of 4 Israeli hostages' bodies and 602 Palestinian security prisoners. We were told this, Lazar, you were told also from an Israeli official, as well as the Hamas statement. So, Lazar, what do we know so far this morning about who will actually be released in terms of the remains of the Israelis?
So we haven't gotten the names, but there were... over the past few weeks, it was pretty clear who was on that list. We know the 4 that were released last week, so it's just the 4 that were remaining on the list. I don't have those names in front of me, but we have had lists. We've put up that list in the past after every release that has happened so far. Basically, as you said, we're getting to the end of the first phase. The question is, what happens now? There was tension over the around the last release when the Bibas family was released. There was anger in Israel that that Hamas continued to do those gruesome, those grotesque ceremonies before releasing the coffins. I'm sure a lot of people saw them: crowds, music, displaying the coffins, propaganda statements on the stage, on the coffins themselves, even inside the coffins. And Israel has said that Israel didn't release the 602 prisoners, Palestinian prisoners it was supposed to release, and said, we're not going to do that until we have guarantees that you're not going to play these games anymore with the bodies this time, and that they will be released and turned over in a much more respectful fashion. So this time it's going to go through Egypt. So I don't expect there to be those ceremonies. But as I said, we're at the end of the first stage. So what happens now?
Lazar, does this mean that phase 2 is now on track in terms of the talks? Because U.S. Mideast envoy Steve Witkoff was meant to come to the region, and now we're hearing he's not coming to the region. So what's happening there?
So Witkoff was supposed to come tonight. He's postponed his trip, but he said yesterday that he was still going to come in the coming days. An Israeli official told me it just makes sense for him to come when things are a little bit more right. So I think that means that they want to make sure that this final turnover, this final handover of slain hostages happens, and then they can start thinking about what comes next. Is phase 2 on track? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. An Israeli official told me yesterday that there's 3 options that Hamas can choose from. It can continue to release hostages. There's plenty of hostages still in Gaza. And if it does that, the ceasefire will continue. That's basically, effectively, an extension of phase 1. It can go to phase 2 if it accepts Israel's demands. Israel's demands, as they always have been, are the disarming or the disarmament of Gaza, the demilitarization of the Gaza Strip. Hamas's leaders at least go into exile. And Hamas has no leadership roles, no governance role in the Gaza Strip anymore. If Hamas agrees to those terms, and obviously it's very, very unlikely that that happens, then we move to phase 2, which means the release of the rest of the hostages the living hostages, and a full pullout of the IDF and end to the war. The third option for Hamas is if they wait until next Saturday, so March 8th, and they still haven't given back any more hostages after these 4 bodies, then Israel will consider the ceasefire over, and then this starts moving toward back to war, back to full-scale war. And the official told me that in ways that have been quite different than the way Israel has fought in the past. You have a new defense minister, you have a new chief of staff, there's no weapons holdup from the U.S., and you have full legitimacy, the official said, to go back to war. So if indeed war happens, Israel is saying that it is going to be even more intensive than in the past, and it's up to Hamas to choose which future it wants.
Lazar, thank you for all of these updates. I'll let you go now.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Tal, yesterday, Opposition Leader Yair Lapid presented in Washington a day after plan for Gaza, which envisioned an extended Egyptian guardianship of the war-torn Strip. He said, Israel cannot agree to Hamas remaining in power. The Palestinian Authority is neither willing nor able to manage Gaza in the near future. Israeli occupation is neither desirable nor possible, and a constant state of chaos is both a security threat and a humanitarian disaster. So according to the plan, as we're hearing, have Egypt take responsibility for managing the Gaza Strip for 8 to 15 years. And Tal, I just have to ask you, forgive me if I'm wrong, but I haven't felt that trust between Egypt and Israel is at an all-time high right now. So how could this possibly take place?
So, as you said, Lapid made this suggestion while visiting in Washington, D.C. It's one among many plans that are being put on the table at the moment, engaging Egypt in the solution. A big component of Lapid's suggestion is to eliminate Egypt debt to the world, to the international community. Egypt is under heavy debts because, when Trump suggests that Egypt will be engaged in taking in the Gazans, and if not, he will, stop U.S. assistance to Egypt. That's not a big, chunk of money. It's only around $1.5 billion a year. It is a lot of money, but, if you compare it to Egypt's budget, which is around $110 billion a year, it's, they can live without that aid. But eliminating the debt, as Lapid suggested, that's a big step. However, I do not think that the Egyptians will be happy to, how would you say that, sell off their Palestinians' neighbors, right? For money. It doesn't make sense to them. And also the Egyptians, from the beginning of this process, but, even before the war, they kept on saying, basically, this is not our problem. This is your problem, not ours. And what Lapid is suggesting is for the Egyptian to take this as their own problem. And when you say guardianship, it means that they will be the occupier, if you may. They will manage Gaza, all civils aspects and military aspects. They will make sure there are no guns in there. They will make sure there is a civil administrations for 8 or 15 years. It seems to me that the Egyptian will not go for anything like that, except when you have a Palestinian state at the end of the process. So this is a very big concept that the Egyptians will keep on saying, I suppose, for generations. They want to see a Palestinian state. They don't want to see an Egyptian state in there. So this suggestion is interesting, but it has a lot of problems. And we did not hear any formal comment coming from Egypt yet.
Okay, Tal, let's turn to more domestic issues. And the head of the United Torah Judaism Party has threatened to basically not pass the budget, if I'm understanding the threat properly, because the budget is meant to finish all of its clearances by the end of March. We're far from reaching that state right now. The end of March is a huge, huge amount of time in Israeli political life. But do you think that this threat is in any way, realistic at this point?
So this government has 30 days to finish off the 2025 budget. Unless, if they don't do that, it's not just a shutdown, as you may know with the familiar term, it's also a dissolvement of Israel's Knesset and election. An election will take place on June 25 if budget is not passed by the end of March. This is the implications. Now, Goldknopf, who is the housing minister, he says if we don't finish off the draft bill, actually meaning an exemption bill for Haredi young men, if we don't finish it off before the budget, then this government is done. I'm dissolving, I'm stepping out. And, he has 6 seats. If he's out, then Netanyahu doesn't have a majority and he's unable to pass the budget and so on and so forth. This is a threat he put on the table, I think, in order to make sure that the exemption bill, meaning no draft for young ultra-Orthodox men, is being enacted. The problem is that many people in the Likud and in other parties, as like the religious Zionists, they don't want to just give exemption to the Haredi young people. They want to enlist them. And there is division inside the coalition on that. And because of this division, they are unable to come with any type of solution. So Netanyahu's suggestion for Goldknopf or the United Torah Judaism is just let's pass the budget and we'll just do it. And this government will have, a year and a half more, and we'll deal with the draft later on. And to that, Goldknopf says, no, I've been through that before. If you don't do it now, it's never going to happen. So, I mean, you have to ask yourself, is this a real threat, or is this just playing around politics? And I would guess, I would put my bets on the other options. I think they are, kind of playing with it, and they will probably stick together in order to get this government to move on. But, maybe not. We'll see.
Let's go to a short break and discuss the events of today and yesterday in terms of the funerals of the hostages who came back, unfortunately, dead from Gaza recently.
And again, as I said, people working for the ICRC are humans. When you're faced with such tragedies, unless you're heartless, you respond to that in a humane way. I've had my non-Jew colleagues at work telling me that they haven't slept at night because they had Kfir and Ariel Bibas coming up in their dreams. And that goes with me because it really kind of shows that when you do this humanitarian work, you can't avoid being impacted on the humane and personal level. So while we understand the public sentiment and we feel it, and we're oftentimes even a part of it on the personal level, we have to make sure that we stick to the unique principles and methods that ICRC follows all around the world.
And we're back. Family, friends, and the president on Tuesday eulogized Oded Lifshitz, who was the 83-year-old peace activist who was taken hostage on October 7th, 2023 from Kibbutz Nir Oz and slain in captivity. His wife, who was likewise a hostage but released in a previous deal, lamented that he was killed by those he sought to help. And yesterday as well, Ofri Bibas, who is the sister of the released hostage Yarden Bibas, slammed Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, telling him to, quote, shut up, after he repeatedly described the murders in captivity of Yarden's wife Shiri and young sons Ariel and Kfir against the wishes of the family. Shiri, Ariel, and Kfir are being laid to rest today, right now, as we're recording. Now, Sue, I'm going to start with you, and then we're going to talk about more of the political implications of these funerals and what's happening in general. But Sue, in a heartrending address during a rally of relocated Kibbutz Nir Oz residents who are now in Kiryat Gat, on Saturday, the mother of Yoav Avital, who is a friend of murdered hostage Ariel, described his loss, Yoav's loss, from the perspective of a 5-year-old. So, Sue, tell us in your words what the mother of Yoav Avital said on Saturday.
You and Tal and I have boys. One of mine definitely went through the superhero period of believing that superheroes could solve all problems. And that's what little Yoav did. Yoav, age 5, who was a friend of Ariel's from when they were babies. And his mother told how in the early days, the first reaction was him saying, well, Ariel isn't his friend because he's dead. And then shortly after, well, he's not dead. He's alive, Mum. He's in his room. You just don't know what the number is. At one stage, Yoav asked his mum to help him write a letter to take to the kindergarten teacher so that she could give it to Ariel when he returned. And I want to just read what the letter said. It said, I want to draw Batman for you along with all the flying heroes so that you'll feel like flying over Gaza and fight the bad guys with a bow and arrow. Then you'll come back to us and be with us in kindergarten. I hope you buy yourself some sweets and a cape. I miss you. And he would ask whether the two boys, Ariel and Kfir, had a playground in Gaza where they could play in the sand and run around. And on Purim, he wanted to save his Batman outfit for Ariel and then decided to wear it himself when Ariel didn't come home so that he could fly to save him. And when Ariel didn't come back as part of the live hostage deal, he suggested that maybe the terrorists loved them so much that they couldn't let them go. And of course, we know today that the terrorists murdered them with their own hands. And when his parents had to tell Yoav that Ariel had died, he couldn't accept it. He said, he's still alive, Mom. He didn't understand, because if Ariel is in space, that means he's flying in space. He can't die. And then he had a final brainwave, which was to invent a special potion with ingredients to bring Ariel and Kfir back to life. He said it'll have a little of the power of Batman's knives, fire, speed, and the cape, so that he can fly quickly. The knives will quickly cut the bottle and spill over his body, and then he can come back to us. It's really simple.
It is so simple when it comes from a 5-year-old, and unfortunately, this is not the situation, as we all know. Let's talk a bit, all of us, about the mood of the country today. The streets were lined today and yesterday with people honoring the convoy of the bodies that were being buried. And it's moving in itself to see all the Israeli flags today also mixed with orange balloons or other symbols of the Bibas red-haired boys. And of course, the very fact that Oded Lifshitz, for example, was such a peace warrior and was killed by those he had sought to help is something that is so devastating to swaths of the country. Tal, first of all, just comment on this, the fact that this peace warrior was killed, murdered at the hands of people he tried to help.
Right, devastating moment for the country because, as you may know, not too many liberals and lefties are left after this war. And you know, when you visit Nir Oz, and I visited them about a month ago, you still have people in this kibbutz who still believe in peace and in coexistence between Arabs and Jews. When you talk to people, I've talked to Avram Klangbel, 80 years old. Many of his, neighbors and friends from early days were either kidnapped and murdered on the day of the massacre. Avraham, I said, and he's 80, as I said, he was, looking through the window to see all of his female neighbors, Adina Moses, and all the name, Yafa Adar, and so on, being kidnapped. And of course, it was dear friends of Oded Lifshitz, and they still talk in terms of peace. They think, up until today, and this is the legacy of Oded, that wars cannot solve problems and cannot solve conflicts. And even when you have such hatred on the other side, you still have to aspire to a better world where Oded Lifshitz is driving kids from the border with his car, Palestinian kids, Gazan kids, to get cancer treatment in Israel. This is what Oded Lifshitz has been doing for his entire life. Now, it was very present at the funeral yesterday. And also, I just want to talk a bit, if that's okay, Amanda, about what we're seeing today. When we are recording this chapter, I have my TV live on my other side of the room here, and you can see the roads, the highways, the streets of Israel filled with people who came with flags and signs to support the Bibas family. I don't think we ever seen a sight like that where you see like the solidarity and the sorrow of the people, of the Israeli people. They couldn't gone to the funeral because the funeral is taking place in this very, very small, tiny community down in the south. They don't have a space in the cemetery for so many people. So the Bibas family suggested, if you want to, take part with us in this, very, difficult hours, maybe you can take to the bridges, highways, roads, and you see all along the way, like a 1-hour drive, huge amounts of the public coming out with flags and supporting signs. And that's a very tough day today to see a woman at the age of 32 with her babies, one at the age of 5, the other one 9 months. And they're all going to be buried with her parents, Margit and Yossi Silverman, were murdered in the massacre in Iroz. So you're going to have 5 graves at the same location from the same family, and only Yarden to survive this.
So you've been doing a lot of work with the people who survived in the Otef, in the Gaza envelope, and you're also looking into, I know you're still working on this piece, the issue of the orphans from those whose parents, 1 or 2, were murdered during the massacre. The Bibas family has become a real symbol because of their innocence and their, just the terror, the sheer terror that was captured on film when Shiri and the boys were kidnapped. But there are so many families who were destroyed on October 7th. And the orphans themselves are fighting for recognition in a way, it sounds like to me from what you've told me off mic. Tell us very little bit about this that you're working on.
I think there's a big contrast between children who've been orphaned by parents who've died in military service or in the security services, because there is a veteran organization, the IDF Orphans and Widows Association, which looks after these people and has been doing, for many, many years. The orphans of October 7th, I think, found a very, very new situation where they didn't really know where to turn, where responsibility for support is divided between different organizations, a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of very difficult form filling when, these families are completely broken as it is. Sometimes one parent is left having to deal with things without the other parent, to grieve, to be with the children, often giving up their jobs. There have been cases where there have been cases, certainly up to 18, over 20 cases of kids or families where both parents were killed. In some cases, I think in most of those cases, if not all, it's members of the family that have taken them on. But it's just incredibly difficult. So you have, for example, grandmothers looking after little tots because their daughters were murdered at the Nova party, that kind of thing. So a number of organizations have sprung up to try and plug this gap, as it were, to bring the information together, to bring social workers to help them negotiate their rights, and also to provide them support in other ways. But I will be reporting on that more fully.
Another point is the case in which communities that are just outside the designated border of aid are actually incredibly hard hit and are not receiving the governmental support. So one case is a portion of Ofakim. Tell us about this neighborhood and what's not being done here.
Yes, Ofakim has a neighborhood called Mishor HaGefen, where 27 civilians and 6 security people were murdered on October the 7th. That's in addition to another 16 elsewhere in the city. Now, there is a boundary that was set of 7 kilometers, which is just over 4 miles from the Gaza border, as the boundary within which, over the years, the state has provided special aid. And because the government didn't really know what else to do, and that was set according to the distance that rockets could reach quite a few years ago. That is no longer relevant, and it's certainly it's no longer relevant with rockets. We now know that they can reach a large portion of the country, but also obviously the Hamas terrorists got beyond that border. They got to Ofakim, which is a city in the western Negev, to Netivot. They also got to an area of Moshavim. I reported on this a couple of years ago, where the line actually runs through the cluster of Moshavim, so that people who've been very badly affected are left out of this net. And on a couple of days ago, the state controller felt it was urgent enough, an urgent issue, or an issue of sufficient urgency, along with a few others, to publish an interim report on the rehabilitation of the Gaza border area, where he said that the government was supposed to have, or the Prime Minister's office was supposed to have come to the government by February last year with a reviewed boundary, and it hasn't done so yet. And this is actually holding up 5 billion shekels in development funds also, because obviously until they know where the boundaries are, they don't know how to distribute the money. So we have to watch this space and see what happens. The local authorities and the Moshavim are all in separate high court cases over this to pressure the government to include them. And there has been talk, certainly, of the government giving them special funding, taking it away, taking it out of the existing Tekuma budget, which is the existing budget for the rehabilitation of the area, which is a total of 19 billion, of which 5 billion is for development. So I think that in the end, they will be supported. It's a question of how long it takes, because this aid is desperately needed.
Needless to say, going back to one of our previous items, if this government doesn't pass the budget by the end of March, in a month from now, then as I said, there is not just stop of the budget, but also a problem with specific areas where the country is not providing what it needs to provide. And we do see from the beginning of the war up until now, we see civilians are helping rebuild the area, whereas governmental assistance is not being provided properly.
Right. And Tal, Sue is definitely reporting on that as well. I thank you both for joining me on this day. And as you noted, Sue, we are all mothers of sons, but children. And it is definitely one of those days that you just want to hug your kids a little more closely. So thank you, all of you, for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Times of Israel's Daily Briefing. Please check out another episode tomorrow. This episode was produced by the Podwaves. If you have any questions or comments about this or any other episode, please drop us an email to podcast@timesofisrael.com. Until tomorrow, shalom.